And now I'm just going to go to the face melt. Do a little cut and paste, and we'll be live in 1 second. Technically, we're live now, but people aren't seeing.
This is just off camper bad banter while the live mic was on and they didn't realize it.
So again, this is number 29. Share a group. Whoops, no, start a page. Sorry. Veterans Action Council going live. We'll see a moniker pick up here in a second, showing that connection in the upper right-hand corner. And we are live. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 29 in this year of 2022. We are here discussing the Safe Banking Act with special guest David Borden. We've also been joined by Mike Liszewski, council members Michael Green, Michael Crowitz, Brian Buckley, George Armstrong, and myself. So thank you for joining us tonight. And we're going to start off with David Borden. Please introduce yourself, your affiliation.
I'm David Borden, the founder and executive director of StopTheDrugWar.org, based in the DC area.
Right on. And Mike, please introduce yourself.
Hey, Mike Liszewski, founder of Enact Consulting, and I do consulting with the Drug Policy Alliance, but tonight I'm speaking on my own behalf.
And thank you very much. So as we get into it, we are talking about the Safe Banking Act, which was introduced by Representative Perlmutter in the House. So we're talking about HR 1996, the Safe Banking Act of 2021. Now 2022 as well. So as you know, that many of us have had difficulties, or you may not realize there's difficulties in dealing with banking if you've been in the cannabis industry. I myself have been doing this for 22 years with Berkeley Patients Group, and we have been kicked out of 38 different banks. So that gives you an idea of the problem that we have personally seen, and other banking institutions around the United States have tried to come forward in various states, Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, to actually pitch their own bank to actually distribute money or take money from cannabis institutions. And each one of those, of course, happened to be FDIC insured. So shortly after they decided to go out and start to flout their new businesses, the Treasury Department, or the DEA via the Treasury Department, basically sent very stern letters warning them that they could lose potentially their banks by doing and flaunting these types of illegal activities. I myself was forcefully evicted from a location in 2012 at Berkeley Patients Group, where the government went after the bank and said either the bank evicts us as a dispensary or we're going to take your bank. So that is the type of coercion and strong arming the government has been able to do for decades, and has shut down institution after institution. And therefore it has become a challenge, if not an excessive challenge, for people in the cannabis industry to have banking. And why does banking matter? Why do banking services matter? Well, just to pay my employees, just to pay my taxes, simple things like paying my utilities. Those are all things that usually require banks, checks, and accounts. And those are traced, those are flagged. Local treasury is told to look for cannabis businesses specifically. And as of course we saw the hemp industry take forward, we also saw an attack on the banking for the hemp industry itself. So we see it crossing over, unfortunately, multiple industries regarding cannabis. And so, as we start off this, what is the problem? That's the problem. That's a huge problem. And what is the solution? Well, this is one potential solution, which is this act. And now, how do we proceed? Well, that's going to be a discussion we're going to get into pretty quickly. And, we're also going to be touching on rescheduling. But I'm going to start off with David Borden. And from your perspective as a activist for many decades yourself, I of course have my industry issues of how I've seen the problem. So how have you viewed the problem?
Well, I hadn't focused all that much on the banking issue until about 2.5 years ago, when it became viable in the House of Representatives, and all the concerns you've listed, Etienne. I know a small fraction about them that you do, and I've already learned more from listening to you. My main interest has been from the worker safety perspective. The cash environment is the leading draw for robberies in general. It has to be presumed to be it's very likely to be the biggest draw for robberies in the cannabis industry, and very clearly it must be presumed to be. There's the point has been made. Well, robbers also look for marijuana, which they can sell. Obviously, when there's cash and marijuana, one becomes a more of a target than just marijuana. The point was made to me recently by someone with a law enforcement background that the legalized marijuana industry in the U.S. is probably unique in the scale of cash that's involved on a daily basis, together with the how well known that is. So my view personally has been that worker safety is just something that people should support. I don't think it should be juggled with against other issues. I've seen quotes from people who have wanted to delay it. Some of the staff at DPA, not Mike, that have surprised me in the extent to which the safety factor in at stake in the cash issue is being denied. And I don't think that's right intellectually. I don't think it's something our movement should be saying. The argument also has the effect of undermining one of the core arguments for legalization, the crime argument. I also recognize the frustration of equity advocates in seeing the industry unfold, and some efforts at inclusion, but not broadly successful ones. It seems to me that when there's a legalization bill, when federal legalization happens, that may well be a turning point after which it becomes more difficult to increase the inclusion. Maybe not impossible, or more difficult. I doubt that the passage of banking would mark such a turning point, but I could be wrong about that. And equity also is a very important issue, but I think the discussion should be grounded in what the realities are about the cash environment and robbery, what robberies can mean when there's violence, or even the trauma when there isn't. There's a compromise. I don't know if compromise is the right word. A proposal was put out that DPA is supporting to say, let's all work for a better banking bill that does equity also. And I think if that can pass this year, that would be something to celebrate. If it turns out that can't pass, but banking can, you know, I don't know that we probably can't get that answer tonight, but I'm wondering what will be the intentions of the senators who reportedly scuttled banking in the defense authorization bill recently, and of advocates who had, you know, who had called for that as well. So it's a contentious moment for the movement, and there are legitimate disagreements. Not every statement I've heard on the issue is one that I feel is well grounded, though, and I think we need to take great care when, rightly or wrongly, we perceive our issues coming into a clash with other justice issues, of which worker safety is one. So.
Thank you for that perspective. That's very helpful and gives us a deeper understanding from the activist point of view. But there's another one as well. Mike Liszewski, thank you for joining us tonight. What is the problem from your perspective? What do you see as the issue?
So yeah, I think a little bit of framing of the issue is helpful before delving into the with banking. You know, there's at least two buckets you can sort of classify banking under. On the one side, you have the transactional side of banking, stuff like being able to get credit cards, you know, having a payroll service, not having to deal in an all cash environment, that sort of thing. So you have transactional banking on the one hand. On the other, you have commercial lending. And that's, you know, how, you know, businesses can get commercial loans, you know, to build out their businesses or startup money, all that. So, you know, you have these two different areas of banking. The public safety side resides only on the transactional side. The commercial lending side is more where the social equity concerns, I think, come into play. So you sort of have these two different issues here. And that can potentially inform how solutions will go, but I think, you know, we'll wait until that question there. So talking about some of the problems, and I'll talk about the problems on the commercial lending side first. I don't think anyone has really done an accurate or really any sort of analysis on what types of commercial lending would actually be available in a safe harbor environment. Since marijuana would still be in Schedule 1, it would still be illegal. In the CSA, it would still remain illegal, I think, regardless of where it's placed. But I know we'll talk a little more about that later. But that's important for the commercial lending side of things, because we're going to be talk about the credit worthiness of a business. And when they're doing these credit determinations, they're going to be it's going to have a higher level of scrutiny in a safe harbor environment than it would if marijuana were legalized federally. So one of the things commercial lenders are going to be looking at are how long a business has been open. What sort of assets do they already have? Do they have, you know, do they have cash reserves? Do they have product that can be liquidated? That sort of thing. And when you add all that up, MSOs are really well positioned to get commercial loans under a safe harbor environment. Small businesses, emerging entrepreneurs, many of which who are social equity applicants, but some who aren't, you know, your mom and pop type person who's, you know, trying to get a craft license, but not with social equity designation. All those types of businesses are going to have a really difficult time getting a loan under a safe harbor environment. So passage of safe banking as it's currently written could widen the gap between MSOs and small businesses. So it does have some potential to do more harm than good. On the transactional side, I think, Dave really, already laid out the public safety issue. I used to work for a marijuana company, not in the operations area, so I wasn't close to that. But dealing with I had paychecks come late and things like that. So it is for someone who's living paycheck to paycheck. That's also an equity issue of sorts. We know cannabis jobs are pretty well paying, but if you're an entry level bud tender, you're probably living paycheck to paycheck. And the prospect of having that payroll service not being there in certain weeks is, a legit issue. So beyond the public safety, there's, that component. And I know, I think for some of those sorts of reasons, UFCW is active in this issue on that side. I don't want to say that the public safety issue has been overstated, at least in the context of anyone who's been involved in a robbery, or a cannabis worker who's faced an armed robbery, traumatic situation. I don't mean to lessen that any, but what I will say is I doubt individuals who are making the public safety argument on safe banking are bringing up those same things when they're dealing with their local, trying to get local permitting. I don't think they're, saying that they're, a potential, armed robbery risk when trying to get local licensing. So there's also studies that show marijuana businesses do not increase crime in the surrounding areas. So the statistical data, there's not really an evidentiary case to show that marijuana businesses are getting robbed at a higher rate than other businesses. Now, if that data does exist and I'm unaware of it, please send it my way. But there's those two not competing factors, but those two factors are there. That sort of is the public safety argument. Dave was talking about consistency and rhetoric. If we're talking about marijuana businesses being particular targets for violent crime, are we making those arguments when we're doing our state and local advocacy trying to pass these laws? And I haven't really seen that. Maybe to the extent of trying to get like a state credit union type thing passed so that the industry and the state has that opportunity, but you don't really see those arguments coming up there. So there's a little a disconnect of sorts in terms of intellectual consistency. So those are sort of the two problems as I see it. You have the ones on the transactional side, which is where a lot of the public safety concerns come up, and then on the commercial lending side is where you have the social equity type of concerns.
Thank you for that great breakdown, further explaining the nuances of this, because it's so large. There are multiple nuances to this compounded problem because it's been ignored for decades, and it's literally the can's been kicked down the road, and unfortunately it may still happen with this particular type of legislation as we speak, as we know that we do not have a friend in the White House per se regarding our issue. So frustrations still lay there. But as an activist of many decades, Michael Krawitz, you of course have had your own sort of headaches. So what's the problem that you see with banking?
Yeah, thanks, Etienne. I feel like this is one of those places like the Dormant Commerce Clause, where as military veterans in the cannabis space, we have a conflicted opinion, a conflicted position. In the Dormant Commerce Clause, of course, we'd like to see the best elements of cannabis programs at the state level be preserved after federal legalization. But if federal legalization rolls out the way it's being intended right now, it may actually, because of the Dormant Commerce Clause, just wipe away some of those programs. We want the Dormant Commerce Clause to wipe away the lines that exist between states that prevent veterans from being able to freely travel with their medicine. So we're on both sides of that, and in this case, veterans have made significant business plans and business models out of the situation that we have with all cash moving around in this cannabis business. First of all, you've got cannabis moving around, which for a long time was difficult to get mainstream with Wells Fargo kind of trucks to pick that up and carry it around. I think they're much more likely to do that now than at the beginning of our experiments in legalization in the state level. But at the beginning, it was almost all cottage industry of military veterans taking on this job of transporting cannabis, transporting cash, handling cash. And while I appreciate that, and we as Veterans Action Council certainly appreciate the jobs and the opening for military veterans to be able to use their security experience in the cannabis space, is sort of our role, near the door to make sure everybody gets their cannabis in a cool, calm manner, be the blunt force of security in this situation, as well as cannabis cultivators and a lot of other things that veterans like to do in the space. But I think this was one that we felt particularly qualified for. But the problem is, of course, that everyone knows in this space that it's a non-starter to have any kind of guns around cannabis. Just absolutely, whether you're going to think you're going to get caught with it or not, the penalties are so insanely severe at the federal level, and it jumps tracks out of anything that might be protected by state law. Once you start talking about guns involved, there have been very difficult issues for us to have security, and actually without having any kind of weapons and guns, and or having guns and facing the consequences of that. So that right there in itself, all by itself, is why Veterans Action Council looks at this as a security issue at the national level. Because if you've got large sums of money moving around in a state or multiple states, we're in a world where we're vulnerable to out of country influence a lot more than maybe other times in our history, because of the interconnectedness of the internet and all. And we need to be able to defend ourselves, knowing at the national and even international level that there's this situation that prevents large numbers of people from being able to defend themselves. And I'll add one last little thing. I watched in horror as there was these snatch and grab things going on out in California, stealing Prada, bags out of the storefront and stuff. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't saying that was the part that I was talking about being horror watching, although that was pretty bad. What I was in horror watching was the police rolled up to a dispensary, I think it was in Oakland, where they pulled up and the robbery was still going on. The robbers were still there. They pulled up across the street with their lights on and everything, and waited patiently for the robbers to leave before they finally got out of the car, walked over, and started taking their reports on the cannabis that was stolen. That is unacceptable. Second-class treatment that would be unconstitutional, illegal probably under California Constitution as well. So this is really our kind of our place on this, is that angle of it, if you can call it that.
Thank you, Michael. And yes, very good points that you brought up. I want to go to another California business. Council member Brian Buckley. You've been trial by fire, needless to say, in coming into this discussion, as well as being a business owner. So what problems have you witnessed as a cannabis business?
I think Michael brought up a great point, in terms of snatch and grabs, where, we've had, when we're delivering stuff or we're picking up cash, people are out there watching it. And, in certain areas, we've had people like literally roll through like a Jack in a Box, just grabbing some food. And when they're coming out, they're getting stopped, like two cars, like one in front, one behind, come up, smash the window. They want the money. If they're putting money into the vehicle, whatever it may be, it's just becoming a huge security issue. And again, you're losing a lot of things where, essentially we're doing everything right. We're paying our taxes. We're running a legal business. Obviously, we got tax code 280, which is a whole different topic. But those are some of the frustrating points where you could keep things a little bit more safe if we could just do regular banking. And being fully transparent with everything, and actually being able to use checks for the most part and not have all cash all over the place. Those have been some of the big issues. I'm not saying I'm really probably providing any illuminating thoughts on that one, but those on a micro level have just been some of the biggest problems that we've had. And, even too, Another thing you see, like, I look at a state like Michigan where they'll do state banking and they'll set a cap. Like, you won't pay any more than $2,500 a month, no matter how much you've sold. We're talking with some banks here, like charter banks and things like that, and they'll be uncapped. So think about that. I mean, they're going to take a large percent. You're not going to have all the rights of the bank, and they're pretty much ripping you off, and they can get away with it and take advantage of it. So those have been some of the frustrating things where I think if everyone's just very transparent, we get banking passed, which I know it could. I'm very confident if they threw that on the Senate floor right now, it would probably move and pass. It's just getting frustrating. And, it's just, again, you want to try to normalize this business that we're doing, and yet we're getting held up on things for political means.
Yeah, and that's, of course, brings us to this discussion, which is, of course, is a political, hopeful means to arriving at a discussion so that we can just do normal business. So, Councilmember Armstrong, you as a patient out there, what problems have you seen? What do you experience? What do you feel?
Well, I think, as what's already been said, is pretty obvious, a safety issue. As a patient, I think, and as an activist, I think this is this banking problem is it's really the elephant in the room of prohibition, because we have state programs in which the government wants to collect taxes on, but they're not allowing the businesses in these states, even though they're taxing them, they're not allowing them to use the normal banking procedures. And so obviously that creates not only the huge safety problems that we've talked about, but what you were talking about, Etienne. The companies that are trying to do business correct, like you and Brian mentioned, you're doing everything and working very hard, I might add, to do everything correctly that they have in their tax code. And yet you still face all these problems. So I would really love to see the bill passed as it is. And that's where my major concern is with the conversation. So as far as what the problem is, I think what I've had to say was already said, and I'll go on to the next thing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Green, do you have any response to the thought of the problem, being a counselor yourself?
I counsel end to prohibition. It's, the things that have been said here are all viable. They seem all on point. I personally have not encountered any problems in my business. I may be cannabis librist, but I'm selling literature. I'm selling books. And I don't bank under my cannabis librist label. I bank under my own label, or a DBA. But obviously, over the years, I've encountered hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors, people in the dispensary business, all kinds of aspects have encountered problems in the banking system. Fundamentally, I don't know that the problem is with the banking bill per se, politics notwithstanding, but that's the root of it, isn't it? Politics. Why is there still a federal prohibition? When is Congress, if not the President of the United States, going to finally have like an open and joint hearing on all aspects of cannabis in the industry? Look at the billions of dollars to be generated from this. And so many people that want to be in compliance legally. It's, what would you call it? Clusterfuck, mindfuck? I mean, what the hell, right? And this has been going on how many years? So it's, it just seems to incumbent upon me, and part of it goes to the solution, obviously, and the federal prohibition. Let businesses do business, whether you're transactional side, whether you're commercial side, doesn't really matter. And I understand and respect the differences in types of services that are needed, the impact on social equity across the board. It seems to me fundamentally the problem is federal prohibition and a refusal to look at anything that even resembles the truth. It's we talk about a big lie for some of us in regards to the ex-president and what has been flogged since the election. But I'm looking at, it seems to me, the biggest consistent lie in American history for the last 7 years 7 years has been the vilification, the misinformation, the willful ignorance that surrounds cannabis and its place in our society in all aspects. That's about all I have to say, I think.
And of course, its roots are in racism because the drug laws
Amen.
and of course, cannabis prohibition was a racist tool. But it has been used and it's still used against us, which spans into 280E. But just a simple thing like paying your taxes, people. What Michael also, Mr. Kraut spoke toward the Second Amendment. I have to pay tax money in cash, in person, and all I can wear is a vest. Of course, under looking as discreet as I possibly can. But, unfortunately, to have those types of realities, needless to say, are beyond anxiety inducing. They are, they're its own nightmare fuel. I'll just leave it at that. But this is how I've had to be for 20 plus years, because I have to pay my state taxes and even federal taxes and things like, Brinks and various other, companies that normal companies could use, which moves your money and your change to you. We don't get that. We don't get to play with that. We have to be the ones to physically go down to the bank and physically break the change and bring it in, as opposed to any normal business. It's delivered literally right to your safe. But we don't have that luxury. We have to do all the heavy lifting, literally, figuratively, and anxiety wise. And our fear has always been is, how long before somebody who's going to pay their taxes is killed, outright murdered, because they're carrying, cash. So, I know people have to do various things, from disguises to all different types of aspects that you have to do just to go legally pay your taxes as a cannabis business, which is, if you do not, you are going to see hell and high water from the local jurisdiction all the way up. So what we are asked to comply is, like I said, anxiety inducing. As stated, I've been kicked out of 38 different banks now. And some of the horror stories that I have had is literally day before payroll is to be pulled to pay my employees, I get calls from banks saying, we've closed your account. We have your money here for you to pick up in check form, or we've sent check, or where would you like this wired? Multiple times. And it's always on short notice. And it's reasons why at times we've had to pay our employees in cash, and various other normal business practices that we've conceived as normal, but no other regular business would do in any way, shape, or form, nor would they, because of the safety issues. And we can't protect ourselves. So it's kind of a twofold thing, because on top of that, we're also very large businesses that also turn over larger money than your average retail sale locations, we'll just say. And those trigger certain points when you are either depositing a certain amount of money or transferring a certain amount of money. The Treasury Department does get notified. They take copies of who it is, who you are, what you suspect, or what they suspect this transaction to be. And, that's the reality, people. It's not fun. It's not pretty. Everybody thinks, oh, I want to own a dispensary. But, the realities that come with it is, as I stated, there's lots of nightmare fuel sprinkled throughout this. And by not having a simple thing as a safe place to put my money and do banking legally, such as to pay the 401ks for my employees, you have to have a bank to do those sort of things. You can't just say, hey, here's some cash, bank, here's some cash, man. No, it doesn't work like that. That's not how things work, especially in the post 9/11 realities. And of course, we just have to exist under this. So out of these frustrations, people like myself and others created an organization called the National Cannabis Industries Association over 12 years ago. And I'm a proud founder of that. And the two principles that were founded around was about the banking issue and 280E. 280E is another discussion. We've talked it in various others, as well as we can have further discussions in the future, but that's a separate reality. However, Safe Banking Act, we have been working very hard behind the scenes. We got some of the first lobbyists on Capitol Hill to actually be talking about money and then banking. And it's been a very step-by-step gradual process. We couldn't just show up and say, give us banking. You know, it just doesn't work like that. It's a lot of discussions. It's a lot of in-person meetings. I think Mike can speak toward that, as well as Mr. Borden can speak toward, you know, those are the realities that we face. And NCIA has gone so far as to even create and have a lobby day where we take people from all around the United States and bring them together and educate them on how to lobby and take them around a certain issue. And then, bam, go out there as a group and literally hit between 5 to 10 senators or representatives a day. Bring your tennis shoes, a lot of walking, but it's one of the most rewarding experiences you'll ever have, because you're with experienced people who have taught you how to lobby. I'm actually one of those teachers. And one of the things we were trying to do this year was to take the Veterans Action Council and have it as part of the lobby day. Unfortunately, I spoke with Aaron the other day, and lobby day is off for May at this time. So we won't be able to do so. The hope, of course, is that in the fall, that could be potential, or we'll be ready, of course, in the spring. Regardless, we will be there in force to push our issue as veterans. And I want to thank the NCIA's support for helping us along and giving us the support to educate our veterans so they will have the tools they need to go out and hit the streets. So it's just one of those things specifically. So that's kind of it regarding the problem. There's more layers to it, but I think I've given you kind of a 3,000-foot view, as well as a very intimate view of what we have to deal with on a unfortunate surprise basis, because there is no notification. Not even usually. I mean, I have gotten letters in the mail from the bank saying "fuck off." It's usually a call in person because of the amount that's in the account that they call, and of course, it's one of the most contrite, quiet conversations you've ever had with a banker, because they have their tail between their legs. They're not used to closing accounts. They don't want to close accounts. They're used to opening accounts and embracing you. You know, that's just how it goes. That's just how it is. So now that we're past the problem, you know, what is the solution? You know, is the Safe Banking Act the solution? Is rescheduling potentially a solution? That would work with 280E, but would that work with banking? Well, let's start this discussion and go around the roundtable again, and go back to David Borden and start off with you, sir. So as we see, this is not the first legislation launch. It's probably not the last. And if this is a partisan as well as a issue regarding social equity that has clouded the issue for some senators and representatives to have switched alliances on this issue, where Safe Banking Act was initially everybody was towing that party line. The social equity, of course, has also derailed the issue. No offense to anyone in any way, shape, or form. It's just senators like Cory Booker have decided that they are not going to support safe banking until they see social equity become a serious part of the discussion. So, David Borden, what are your thoughts?
Well, if it's okay, I'd like to just first briefly return to one of the points that Mike had made, which I've heard others make as well. The idea that studies have shown dispensaries, marijuana stores lowering crime, and that doesn't seem consistent with the idea that they're a magnet for robberies. In fact, they are perfectly consistent, and arguably to be expected. Businesses that have a flow of people have increase the economic activity, the number of people around that has a reducing effect on crime. That doesn't prevent people who want to commit robberies from looking to those places where they know that there's cash and product that they might be able to get fairly easily. Think of it this way: would you rather stand and wait for your Lyft car on a quiet inner city street that only has homes and not a lot of people around, or on a street that has at least has a convenience store? Which one would you feel safer on? All things being equal, you'd probably be safer in front of the convenience store. But you also know at some point someone's probably going to rob the store. It's statistically unlikely that you'll be there when the robbery happens, or that you'll be inside. But the human activity that the store brings is throughout the business day. So I think, just as I don't see a lot of validity to the argument that others have made that robberies happen from marijuana anyway, so cash isn't an issue. This one, I think, doesn't work for, in both cases. The question is whether the reliance on cash makes things more dangerous than they would be without a reliance on cash. The other things that cause crime or prevent crime are going to be there either way. Now, the solution legislatively, truthfully, I have to say some of the details more. I think if I'm correct, the banking issue has to do with criminal enterprises generally, or perhaps with controlled substances. So if cannabis is rescheduled as opposed to being descheduled, it's still going to be illegal without a prescription. So my guess, but I'm not sure, my guess is that rescheduling alone would not solve the problem, but it would help if we still have places that are devoted just to medical. Legalization is the solution. I support the social equity efforts too. So if we can pass something like the MORE Act, then something to celebrate. If we have to, if it turns out we can pass something that falls short of MORE, we have to consider the equity implications of people getting arrested and convicted for even low-level marijuana offenses now, and who tend to get excluded from much of the economy. So that has to be counterbalanced, against what more might we get if we hold out. Also, will we get anything more by holding out? And we need sophisticated legislative strategy analyses of the kind that Mike probably knows more about than any of us here, and put the brain trusts to work on that level. So along with the the chronological questions that I'm suggesting be rethought, I think let's look at strategy and a let's break down all the different pieces. If banking passes or legalization passes without the equity measures guaranteed, how will that affect prospects for expungements? How will that affect prospects for equity funding? How will that affect prospects for inclusion, whether that's percentages or something else? How will that affect passing further steps toward legalization? Each of the different pieces is going to be affected in its own way. That's so I guess I didn't say a lot about the solutions. I think we have a range of solutions that are codified in bills or talked about, and some of them are better than others.
Right on. Thank you for that. I think you brought some valid ideas to discussion there, needless to say, and a great example. Mr. Liszewski, what do you think? Solutions. Do you see this as viable or real, or is this a flash in the pan, or does this thing have some teeth?
So if I was hoping that safe banking gets passed in the 117th Congress, which is the one we're in right now, that runs through the beginning of next January, I would be feeling fairly good that this is going to get passed. And the reason for that is Ed Perlmutter. When he announced he was retiring, may have been not in the same announcement, but within the same week or two, he announced that he was willing to take down a must-pass bill in order to get safe banking passed. That sounds like a pretty good odds scenario that this legislation will pass. Now, it remains to be seen what kind of pushback you would see on that. I think folks who are working to end prohibition, I think it was Michael Green who was talking about prohibition being the really big problem here. Safe banking wouldn't take down prohibition. The MORE Act, CAOA, or even Nancy Mace's bill, those are the bills that would end prohibition. So safe banking, arguably it gets us closer to that, but maybe it's a Band-Aid, and Congress feels it's done enough on the issue at that point for the time being, that the public safety concerns around the marijuana industry have been alleviated because it's no longer, you no longer have to deal with the all cash environment. So the urgency to deal with this issue is dissipated. We could see a changing of the guard in Congress that may or may not diminish the odds of passing a comprehensive bill, but that could do it. There's also floor time concerns that groups that are working for a comprehensive descheduling bill are worried about, that there's limited floor time in the Senate, limited floor time in the House for that matter. So those are some of the concerns around there. But when you have a member who is willing to take down a must-pass bill to get their preferred piece of legislation passed, that's pretty strong odds. Now, what are some things that could be done to reduce the likelihood that there would be pushback from civil rights groups that have been working on descheduling? I think one of the things that could be done is on the commercial banking side. If you had added protections for minority deposit institutions or community development financial institutions, those are the lending institutions that have traditionally provided commercial loans to minority-owned businesses. One of the things that hasn't been discussed yet is there's just inherent systemic racism in the banking industry. If you look at there was a Treasury report from 2021 that showed white-owned businesses with fair credit ratings were getting approval loans on commercial loans at the same rate as minority-owned businesses that had good credit. So there's a disparity there alone between your predominantly white MSO-owned businesses and predominantly minority-owned social equity businesses. And so, with this commercial lending scenario where the creditworthiness for a small business, they're much less likely to get approved in this scenario. If there's legislation that can improve the creditworthiness or incentivize lending to these businesses, I think that does a lot to alleviate the concerns from civil rights groups and social equity advocates who have been trying to pump the brakes on SAFE. There's another way of dealing with this that would, I think, probably be less satisfying to everyone, but it would remove the controversy of providing a really good thing for MSOs while not providing that benefit to social equity businesses in the commercial lending. And that's if you limit the safe banking, safe harbor provisions to the transactional side. And you take care of all the public safety concerns because you wouldn't be dealing in the all cash environment anymore. You'd be able to pay your taxes electronically, be able to get credit cards, you could take debit cards, all that. So you would remove all the public safety concerns while not widening the gap between the haves and have-nots in the marijuana industry. So that's another way of potentially doing it. I think that's less satisfying to everyone. Social equity advocates really want to have access to commercial lending, but not in the scenario where the MSOs are really the only ones going to get the benefit. So it would be one of those where it's equal on paper, but in practice, we already can see where the disparities would be. So that's a couple of ways of potentially dealing with this. I would say for banking advocates who are or safe banking advocates rather who are working on this, given Ed Perlmutter's willingness to potentially blow up a must-pass bill to get this passed, and therefore increasing the odds, you could sort of go about this two ways. You could first say, hey, we're mostly done. Let's just make sure everyone votes for it so that the bill doesn't blow up. Or realizing, hey, we got a really good scenario to get this thing passed. Let's try to improve it while we still have an opportunity, while we still have the congressional makeup that would be amenable to some of these suggested changes, and to maximize the benefit for small businesses, not just social equity applicants, but anyone who's a small business owner who's trying to get into this, who's just getting into the industry, doesn't have a long track record with their assets, doesn't have a long track record of their business being open, all those sorts of things. You would want to push for these types of reforms that are amendments rather that could enhance the credit worthiness and facilitate the credit determinations from the banks for these businesses. So that's a little bit on the solution side from my end.
Those are notwithstanding some great thoughts, and needless to say, I like your thinking. But of course, that's the thing. We don't know what's actually going to happen, and unfortunately, without having a lobby day to go apply pressure, it's going to require work from you. Yeah, you watching. Yeah, get off your ass. Write your representative, write your senators, and actually say, hey, I support this or I don't support this. But stop sitting on the sidelines. Get active and get involved. We're all active. We're all involved from the local, state, federal, international level. So, question to you who's watching is, what are you doing? What are you doing today to help tomorrow? We know what we're doing. So that's a challenge to you, the viewer. But back to our discussion here. Michael Krawitz is an activist in cannabis who's seen the impacts go from never going to happen in my lifetime to now legal in your state of Virginia. You know, you've seen, needless to say, a swath of reality. So you have a pretty solid understanding on what a solution might entail. And then I also know you have some follow-up questions for us to discuss, but let's start here.
Well, as far as a solution, I agree with everything being said. You know, these are complicated issues that don't just involve access to banking, but involve sort of rethinking the way that we handle assets and sort of the ability to pass on from one generation to another generation, generational wealth, and the ability to participate in a business place. I think, you know, one of the things that we need to try to avoid, and it's the thing that I've heard, you know, articulated at least a couple of times as we've moved along in these circles, is we don't want to have somebody actually literally sitting in prison and catching a glimpse of a TV and seeing someone on TV doing what they were sent to prison doing, and they're getting accolades and getting you know, commendations in the real world for doing something that, you know, at the time landed them in prison. There was a professor, I think it was in Cincinnati area that or Baltimore, it might have been the Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland area. But anyway, they did a you know, scholarly work years ago looking at the finances of drug dealers, essentially street drug dealers. And he came into this, the professor said that he went into the, you know, the assignment looking at it, you know, from a very standard kind of perspective. But by the time he was done, he didn't see these people as criminals on the street. He saw them as entrepreneurs that in another world and another, you know, sort of paradigm would be working for Fortune 500 companies. And I think as a nation, we have for decades taken some of our best and brightest young people who could very well have helped us. And there's some data that really supports this, you know, that women especially, and you know, the people from the inner city for sure, that have been just ground up by this war on drugs that could have actually made a significant impact and positive impact on our world. And that's just a generational debt that we need to pay. So I get that, and we need to figure out how to do that. But anyway, I had a couple of, you know, sort of sidebar questions. And we always hear about, I guess the way I said it the other day to you, Etienne, it's the best way to approach this about scheduling. Every time you hear a professor talk about, you know, the reason why this or that, you can't have guns, or, you know, you can't be on a transplant list, or you have trouble with federal housing, or this stuff that we deal with as veterans where the VA doctor can't recommend cannabis, all these things. They say it's because cannabis is in Schedule 1. So, you know, does taking cannabis out of Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, does that solve the problem? Does taking it out of scheduling completely solve the problem? Is one different than the other, you know, rescheduling or descheduling? And is descheduling actually a full solution? So I would appreciate if you, either you guys, Mike or David, have any, you know, input on that, because I've been just sort of working on it. I personally, I don't think that there's a heap load of difference between rescheduling and descheduling as far as fixing some of these problems. I think that they would solve the problem, but maybe in some cases not immediately, not absolutely directly, as certainly as in the case of some of the criminal justice reform that would happen certainly secondarily to a rescheduling. So anyway, that's my feeling on it.
David, would you like to respond to Michael's?
That's something I'm really not sure about either. One question I have, maybe Mike can illuminate. I've heard conflicting claims about whether the administration can deschedule without action by Congress. And Mike, you're an I think you're an attorney. Maybe you know the answer to this.
What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, sorry to cut off there for a second. So the answer is yes, but it's not a simple process. It's not as easy as signing an executive order. They can't do it with the stroke of a pen. There's a very long legislative and regulatory process that's spelled out for reclassifying a substance under the CSA, and you can't get around that. What the president can do, they have a bully pulpit for one. They can, instruct the attorney general or the head of HHS to move forward with the petition to do a rescheduling evaluation. And they can announce that they want the outcome they want to see, or that they would like to see Congress pass a bill to remove marijuana from the CSA or put it in a different schedule, if that was the thinking. So the president has some ability, but it's not as it's sometimes described as being as simple as the stroke of a pen or an executive order. It's not that easy. The simplest way is through a congressional act. Of course, Congress is a total logjam right now, and that's practically speaking challenging. Certainly, as long as the filibusters in the Senate, that's going to be a challenge. As far as I think Michael had asked, Michael K had asked on the brought up not seeing a difference between rescheduling and descheduling. I was, if you caught me looking off camera at that point, I was trying to get a quick answer on this and I couldn't find one, but I seem to think that it would trigger federal preemption issues, which could really cause problems for industries in states right now. Right now, there's no problem with federal preemption. And if you were to tinker with the schedule, that could raise those issues. Now, it's possible that those federal preemption issues could have no practical impact or little practical impact. Right now, marijuana is completely illegal federally, and federal government's essentially looking the other way when it comes to adult use programs. I know they're causing problems. You have Treasury officials dropping their business cards off at banks, and the bank shuts down the business or shuts down the bank account. I know that's one of the ways that's happened. It would potentially enable the shutdown of state industries. So descheduling would, at least in terms of the transactional banking issues, it would completely remedy those issues. I think you would still have the lingering components of do small businesses, do social equity applicants, are they able to compete on anything resembling equal footing with MSOs in a descheduling environment? Some of these criticisms that are being levied at the SAFE Act right now, Safe Banking Act, for failing to address that, may also apply to the MORE Act. It may also apply to some of these descheduling bills that haven't really addressed banking, other than the fact that it deschedules and opens the door to banking, and does so in a way that doesn't have the safe harbor concerns. So the creditworthy decisions would be a little bit easier for social equity applicants and small business owners in a descheduling scenario versus if marijuana was still somewhere in the CSA and somewhere still federally illegal at that point, unless it was prescribed, and FDA approved, and that's a whole other ball of wax that doesn't really help the industry in any way. So I think there's a pretty big difference between rescheduling and descheduling, particularly here. I know with 280E, as long as you get it out of from 3 or lower, that would fix the 280E issue. So there could be some relief for industry if you had a rescheduling to 3 or lower. If I'm not mistaken, Biden, the one time he sort of talked about scheduling, said something about Schedule 2, which, it's all the problems with preemption and none of the benefit of, fixing 280E. So, if there was a move to Schedule 2, that arguably could be the worst case scenario. So I think we're probably better off not moving marijuana in the schedule until we can fully remove it. But I'm certainly open to, arguments to the contrary on that.
All right. Michael, did you want to follow up there, or did you have any other thing you wanted to respond to that either David or Michael spoke for?
Well, we didn't talk about it. I think in the margins, we sort of felt like it was probably a non-starter, but something that we should mention nonetheless anyway, are internet currencies, the digital currencies. Going to a full digital currency for the entire cannabis industry would be a bold move by any standard. But aside from whether it was even viable or doable, would it be a solution?
I don't think, as a business owner, I don't think so. If 401ks and businesses and others actually took that type of currency, then I see, that might actually come to some sort of fruition. But the unpredictability of these, on top of the sliding scale, depending on the day, if you follow any of the cryptocurrencies, there is some heart attack fuel outright for people who put money in. It can shit the bed on a moment's notice, and it is also the biggest problem, of which I'm reading that the US regulators, as well as the United Nations, is talking about, is the carbon footprint that these NFTs actually leave because of the electricity production. There don't seem to be sustainable. However, the idea of a decentralized currency that everybody has an equal access in part to is something that is a real reality as we see more banks closing and locations drying up. Myself, I tried to go in and just to do a bank today, and I had to go to 4 different branches because they closed due to staffing issues, because that's we have a pandemic going on, and so they've had to even decentralize their own networks. They've literally had banks on every corner. It was Wells Fargo. I literally had to go 2 towns over in the Bay Area to find an open actual Wells Fargo today, on a Friday afternoon. Okay, so the frustration is it spills over. It is one of our members, Eric Stamper, put in a question on our Facebook regarding use of ATMs at dispensaries. And yes, some dispensaries have access to ATMs that can allow you to debit money, but those are usually shell situations. They are creative financing loopholes that a lot of companies have utilized, and the same aspect the Treasury Department is hunting, depending on when those amounts start to hit sizable numbers. Is basically it hits a threshold. Once it hits that threshold, investigations triggered, and the gig is up. You're getting a call, and whoever is handling your account is telling you, sorry, you're done. And so people like myself have to keep multiple of those on hand for when that one that I'm using goes out. So you literally have to kind of have a string of those, the same that I have banks. And what does somebody in this reality have to do? Well, you have to find a non-FDIC insured bank. Credit unions, firemen's credit unions, policemen's credit unions, I've used them before. You know what I'm saying? It's money. However, because they are small banks, they may tell you is that you cannot go above this threshold, such as you can't hit more than $100,000 in your bank account, or it's going to trigger an investigation. So it's kind of a wink and a nod done between you and the bank, saying that, look, I know what you're doing, but I know you need the services, and they don't mind handling your money. But at the same time, the problem, of course, with also these ATMs are there's offshore companies, shell companies, and all of those that are triggering their own investigations, and they're very inconsistent and can go down on a moment's notice. I can speak firsthand to those experiences, to them happening on a Friday afternoon, and have your entire ATM go down. So dispensaries have to keep a physical ATM on premises or nearby, so that you can therefore go actually take out cash, because you cannot process on a credit card for the most part. So it is still a challenge just trying to process a simple transaction. So the solutions are, education, creative solutions, and those are some of the creative solutions that we in the industry have come up with, so that we can subvert the dominant paradigm and actually maintain our businesses and pay our employees, pay our vendors, because here now in legal states like California, I have distributors. Okay, those distributors don't take cash; they take checks, or they would prefer to have it directly deposited into their accounts. And the problem is that you cannot do names of your business as your business. So I would advise you to, if you are Marijuana Company Incorporated, I would suggest that, or people would also allegedly suggest, is to go out and create a shell company with a different name, like Blue Sky. You know what I'm saying? Something that's just very simple, very normal. Happy Puppies. You know what I'm saying? Something that doesn't seem to raise hackles. And these are how we go around and be that DBA. And then you take that DBA and you apply to that bank so that you can have access. And God help you if they do an internet search on who you are and what you are. Myself, it's a little more challenging after 22 years. But if you're new in the business and you don't have, anything on you and about you, then those opportunities may work for you. But these are the creative solutions that we have had to negotiate and adapt to and be adaptable toward as we continue to do business 360 days a year. So Council Member Jones, you have a question. I see your hand up. So what is your question or your comment?
All right. I wanted to wait until this particular part with respect to differences of opinion on how we proceed. Okay, and been throwing little feelers out there, as you guys have seen and whatnot. But I like, and kind of seeing some of the feedback. But the more I hear the conversation, this is more directed to you, Mr. Borden and Mr. Liszewski.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you for letting me slide there. The more I hear this conversation go on, I remember sitting in a city council meeting and hearing about Markel Corporation. In fact, Markel Corporation had actually even donated to my campaign. I thought that was great, but to be truthful, I really didn't know what it was, but it came up. And I found out that there are such a thing as a specialty insurance market. And what does that mean? Well, wildest example is who insures Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus? They do that type of insurance. Now, the other thing is about credit unions. Credit unions differ from banks because they are owned by their members. And then, while we were talking, I looked up cryptocurrency. And I wanted to know who actually regulates cryptocurrencies. That's important to me because I would want to know, particularly if we're talking about something that really, at this particular point, needs to allow entrepreneurs to move forward. If we're waiting on government, that's a light year there. And it seems to be that any discussion about what government can do and can't do ought to be from the context that we're still working with that, but we're entrepreneurs. We still have got to move forward. So put all three of those thoughts together. I have yet to hear in this discussion that we're having, nothing that would consider the industry itself creating its own credit union, the industry itself seeking to find some specialty type of insurance. When you're talking about FDIC, basically all that does is protect your money, but even then it only protects it up to a certain amount. Okay, so if you got $1 million in the bank, you'd be good if you get your $250,000. So we're not really talking about something that's going to protect you for all your assets. So what we're really talking about here is an industry that's waiting and basically being held hostage by something that ordinarily could be created in a decentralized market outside of what already exists, using a structure that clearly exists. And for the purposes of this conversation, I would suggest that for just a moment, me putting it out there, going to some experts in this particular area and getting an answer from them with regards, why can't we do this? Why can't the industry itself create its own banking system, credit union? Why can't it do just like Amazon's doing, just like all these major companies are doing? When you think about it, if I may, it's just these big companies that are exchanging these dollars, and many of these companies are not using banks anymore. Why? And just for the sake of giggles, we can sit here and talk all day, but just for the sake of giggles, could anybody invest in the industry who has the moxie in the industry to come up with a rationale of why a credit union would be a bad idea? Why seeking specialty insurance to protect the money that's in there be a bad idea? And then number three, making transactions most digital, even if we can't make it all digital. That's my challenge. I mean, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about it.
I can answer that pretty quickly. One, the DEA will just come in and say it's against federal law. We're taking all the money. Thank you. Fuck off. Good day. It's unfortunately just that easy for them, because where's your money? Oh, it's all in this central location. Oh, well, they just come in and literally arc weld the safe open and take the money and walk away. They've done that to dispensaries with snatch and grabs for decades. So until federal law changes, I don't see it. Even companies like Lloyd's of London actually used to insure me because when I started my company, my business partner said, when I was a child, I wanted to feel like somebody, and to be somebody, I want a Lloyd's of London contract. And Lloyd's of London actually insured BPG for a solid decade until laws changed and they saw who we were, and then they saw cannabis and were like, sorry, so politely. So again, the problem that we still have right now, I just read a very interesting story, Anthony, regarding that. Pardon me, your spotlight's on. Is that in states where it is legal, the DEA is actually going and hitting armored cars that are actually picking up cash from the dispensaries and stealing the money out of the armored cars, and then pointing to the DEA going, see, they said it's federal law, and the DEA's like, yep, it's illegal, it's federal, we can cape it. So that's just happening this week. So I read of $12 million stolen in a legal state by the DEA of a legal company that is transferring money in between the dispensary and legal banks, Anthony. So if they're doing that on the side, I mean, I would like to ask David and Mike Liszewski to also comment, but that was kind of my initial response to that. But your idea, again, it's not an untoward thought, because it's such a complicated problem. One thinks there's easy solutions to that, and one would think that's a very logical thing to do. However, insurance companies have literally lobbied in states like California. As soon as the law passed, they went around and intimidated city councils and county councils into making sure that they became dry counties, because their fear is that through lawsuits, the insurance companies are going to have to pay for your medicine if it's medical marijuana. And the last thing insurance companies want to do is start taking away their profits and starting to pay out money because the cost of cannabis is not cheap in any way, shape, or form, no matter what legal state you're in, which is why we're pushing for voucher systems federally for VA patients, because of the cost in legal states is so outrageous that just to, sustain a cannabis patient costs thousands of dollars sometimes a month. And most disabilities are in the 1,200 plus a month. You see what I'm saying? So the realities don't necessarily shake out, and the costs still astronomical. But David, Mike, do you care to respond?
I'm not on the business side. I can just say that I've seen, I've gone to some of the business conferences and always see people who have solutions to they claim to the banking conundrum, and I imagine they're legitimately trying, but I think if they're a way to, people have been trying to do this for a very long time now and haven't been able to. So there probably isn't a good way around the law. I think people probably businesses are probably just going to have to keep
Gentlemen,
jumping through the same hoops.
With all due respect, even in the answers that I received, we were still talking about playing within the system. What I asked was, why cannot the industry itself, we keep talking about the industry, but why can't the industry itself create a credit union? I'm just asking, will somebody, because, ETN, I got to be careful because ETN is my mentor. Okay. I already know his knowledge is way superior than mine on this issue. I get it. Okay. But I also remember, being, the lone cat with these crazy ideas, on city council, that when the city tried them, it opened up new opportunities that we just hadn't seen. So I'm not talking about attacking the problem the way we always have. I'm talking about the common denominator that I did not hear in this entire conversation was the industry creating its own mini banking system. And that's what I'm just questioning. I'm just throwing that out there as a challenge. Does anybody know, in all of these conferences that everybody attends, has there been any conversation whatsoever about the industry creating its own quasi-banking system?
Yes, and I have been part of those discussions, and they were quashed for the simple fact that the DEA would take the money, literally steal it. But again, I want Mr. Liszewski. I want Mr. Liszewski to speak toward it because he has his own educated stance on the issue from his experience.
So yeah, what ETN has said is, a big part of the reason why. But some of the more specific reasons, I think that speak directly to your question. One, if you create a credit union that operates outside the Federal Deposit Insurance Act, you still have the Federal Credit Union Act to deal with, and that has its own set of own issues there. Even if that weren't an issue, another issue is the startup cost to create this quasi-banking system. Would take a tremendous amount of startup money, enough that you wouldn't have any commercial lending out of it. You might be able to rig something together for the transactional side. And I think it's one of the reasons why some states haven't moved forward on trying to do their own workaround on banking, is the startup money just pretty much makes it, fiscally irresponsible to take on for a state. And it sounds like the industry has probably reached some of those same conclusions on trying to do
We have in California. We have, without a doubt, we have tried to do the same situation to create an industry bank and
Right.
have tried so, and it just still kind of arrives at those realities that, you know, the amount of money alone is astronomical, and then to the threat of any of it being taken on a moment's notice basically ends conversation, unfortunately, quite
Gotcha.
quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That I can wrap my head around.
It's billions of dollars. It's not just millions. It's millions of dollars in each state, and you start combining them, we're talking multi-billion dollars, and nobody wants to put their money where it can be stolen. You know,
Gotcha.
I can state that when the DEA invaded my dispensary in 2007, some of us were allegedly able to go into the bank and allegedly took out our money about 10 minutes before the block from the DEA was brought on for a negative 990. It's a negative $1 billion is basically what they put. So anything goes in gets sucked directly to the DEA. So, you know, just for those who are out there, if you do get raided, there's a certain time you can get to your bank and get as much of your bank account cleaned out if they have the cash on hand at your bank, depending on how much is there. That is a very advanced trick, probably one you can't even do anymore, but one that is a badge that I do have on my world, which I'm not necessarily proud of, but you know, that's part of the reality of what we've had to deal with, just to try to stay around or stay you know, alive in the industry. You know, it's literally have to be as creative as you have. It's beyond any type of just regular normal business in that sense and resolve. You have to always think of creative solutions to arrive at the problem, and we're always thinking about them at the local small level, whereas to see these types of change start to swell at the national level is really something we're really looking forward to. David, did you want to follow up?
I was gonna ask, do we need to be thinking about those kinds of arrangements in the advocacy groups?
Oh, have the advocacy? Well, you know, advocacy groups have
Should
been
we be making contingency plans to clean out our bank accounts in case something things go really crazy?
One bit of experience with that that I can remember is Normal and Marijuana Policy Project were routinely getting their accounts shut down, while Americans for Safe Access, which didn't have any word of marijuana or cannabis in the name, we largely, I used to work at ASA from 2011 to 2017. When I was there, you know, we certainly had financial troubles, but we never had a bank account shut down on us. I think in large part because we didn't have marijuana in our name. But this has impacted advocacy organizations as well. And it's not because they touch the plant, but they receive money from entities that sell the plant. So that's where there's been some issues for the advocacy orgs. And if you got a marijuana or cannabis in your name, you're particularly a target in that regard.
And always will be to an extent, unfortunately. And it's usually when you're most comfortable and you think everything's going fine, then you find out that this is a reality that you have to deal with. It's painful, it's arduous, it's invasion of your own privacy, as well as it's a credit to your adaptability. That kind of gives you an understanding of what we've had to do to experience for 22 years. And for new businesses coming on, I'm sorry this sounds so intimidating, but these are the realities. You know, we haven't minced any words. We're not hemming and hawing everything. We're not petting a fluffy bunny here. We're talking about a very dangerous tool that the Treasury Department and the DEA have used against us for decades. And until it is changed out of Schedule I and we see these law changes actually happen, and that the Treasury Department will allow it, you know, then a lot of things will happen. And I think that due to large companies and pharmaceutical companies that have the budgets that the Pfizers and Modernas have on Capitol Hill are ones that we in the cannabis industry have been envious of for decades, because they got a lot. You know, they got a lot. NRA thought they had some. Jesus Christ. Yeah, it's a lot is all I'm saying. But why am I saying that? For the simple fact that now these pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer have bought into dispensaries in legal states. And because of that, they're now going to start using their lobbyists to start talking to the senators and representatives regarding these issues, which is why I think a lot of us have a stronger hope than usual for this Safe Banking Act than we have with most other cannabis legislation in the past. We know as veterans ourselves, we were the first to get out of committee cannabis discussions finally at the congressional level, only to have them be sabotaged or scuttlebutted in the 11th hour by Republican personnel. So that has not changed. But being some of the first to get cannabis out of committees and into these discussions, we feel that we have also been leaders in this discussion and putting it before our leaders so that they can understand what the problem is. But at the same time, you know, this affects mostly smaller businesses in larger state as well as MSO, but not usually the individual patient. You would think. However, as we talked about, it does affect you, the individual patient, because you have to go either have cash ready or go to the ATM or rely on our ATM shells that we have to actually process a transaction. So it does affect you, the individual, every single day. Anytime you go to a legal dispensary, be it adult use or medical, in the 40 plus states that are out there and Washington, D.C. who have this access. So when you're sitting there thinking, well, how does safe banking affect me? There's an example, a clear, a concise one. And if you're purchasing cannabis legal, which majority of us on this discussion are in legal states that have that access, and that's a reality that we all face. Okay, so we'll move on to this one. So the last question would be difference of opinion on how to proceed. You know, we have that from, you know, looking at the legislation that's out there, seeing what has worked, what hasn't worked, what is possibility, is descheduling a reality, you know, and as well as would descheduling 2, 3, 4, or 5 help the problem? I mean, 2 in itself would change the issue of 280E out the gate. You know, it would actually take all the cannabis cases completely off of there. And when you realize the United States is making $4.2 billion a year off of 280E, is that going to happen? Because they want something to supplement that. Replacing $4 billion that they're cherry picking currently is not an easy thing for the government to do. However, when you start to balance it, if they were actually to start taxing it at a national level, then, you know, something like that, or wetting their beak inside the individual states, which they currently are doing at some level, as opposed to turning a blind eye to it and embrace it. But that's unfortunately a long ways off. So where do we go from here, David? What do we think is going to happen? What does your crystal ball show us as a possibility? Or what thoughts do you have on this that you want to share that we haven't touched on as well?
Well, I still think that legalization of marijuana is inevitable, and it's mostly a question of how and when, and what we accomplish in the meanwhile. I think that information about Representative Perlmutter's plans that Mike shared probably does suggest that banking will happen, and will do a lot of good, but also leave a lot undone. So I don't really know how to, you know, predict it much more closely than that. But I think we have a window to get at least something done federally right now. You know, for the differences of opinions, I think all of us should be a little less sure about our predictions, honestly. So that's what I think of predictions.
Spoken like somebody who's been here before. Yeah, I'm one of those annoying guys who likes to look over the horizon and then look back and go, boy, I'm an idiot. But you know, that's what we do when you're neck deep in it. All you can do is just try to get up and look to see what's over the horizon, right? So, Mr. Liszewski, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I would agree with Dave on the point that, there's a lot of uncertainty, and nothing is inevitable. I think, like I said before, I think the odds are pretty good, certainly relative to, the odds of anything passing in Congress, that safe banking has a really good shot of passing this year. But a lot of circumstances could change. There may be something that prevents Perlmutter from taking this nuclear option. The bill that is the next must-pass bill might be something that he really wants to pass for, reasons outside of cannabis, and may have to invoke that option on a different bill, and maybe it doesn't come up. Who knows? Lots of things could happen that could change the dynamics there. There's also, there's not necessarily the Senate. We all know that, just a handful of senators or even one senator can prevent things from passing. So, while a lot of the attention's been focused on the Cory Booker, Chuck Schumer side of things, you also could have like a James Imhoff, Senator Lankford, Senator Cruz, one of these anti-marijuana senators who, might just say, over my dead body, are you going to pass marijuana reform in any, context, while attaching it to this other bill, and, and taking their opportunity to grandstand. So, just because they do invoke a nuclear option on the House side doesn't necessarily mean it will pass, but it does increase the odds. I think I shared my thoughts on descheduling or rescheduling versus descheduling earlier. I think potentially could create more harm than good. I think banking reform, in the absence of ending prohibition, is possible. I don't think tax relief, in the absence of ending prohibition, is going to take place, because, as Etienne alluded to, the federal government's not going to cut off this one supply of money and not replace it with another. So I don't think you're going to see anything involving tax relief until it's replaced with some sort of system of taxation. So, I think, practically speaking, it's very unlikely that 280E relief would happen without some sort of broader ending of prohibition type of bill. And also, I know that a lot of people think there's no chance of passing a comprehensive bill in this Congress. I'm not under any delusion that that's likely, or that even that there's, a small but, decent chance of that happening. But there is a chance of it. I'm sort of talking about Dumb and Dumber, tell me there's a chance. But, we were told last year we had zero chance of passing the MORE Act in the House. We were told that up until the fall, that, we were wasting our time on it. And we got it passed. A lot of things can happen in a lame duck, especially when there's about to be a shifting of power in Congress. And so, something could happen late this year after the elections that we're not really even, our eyes aren't on yet. So there's a lot that could happen in the months to come, but I think there's also going to be a lot of long stretches where very little happens. That said, I do think we're going to see some progress on moving towards a more comprehensive bill. I think we are going to see this year formal introduction of the Cannabis Opportunity Administration Act, or I think I got that reversed, CAOA, so Administration and Opportunity Act. I think we may see some Senate hearings around that. That's going to advance the issue there. One thing we got to keep in mind with marijuana reform is the House has been working pretty closely on this issue for about 10 years now. Senate's barely had to pay attention to it. Banking issue has raised the profile to some extent, but it's only raised it in the banking context, not in the federal criminal justice reform context. And so the prospect of a bill from Majority Leader Schumer on comprehensive has raised the profile of the issue, but we're finding we're still doing a lot of like basic member level education on the Senate side that resembles the type of meetings we were having 5, 6, 7 years ago on the House side. So, there's the institution needs to catch up. It's catching up quickly. I think the evolution is going to happen faster in the Senate than it did in the House. But the Senate is a very slow moving institution, even on its best days. So that's a long way of saying, who the hell knows? There's a lot of different scenarios that could shake out. I will reiterate, I think safe banking has, I would probably put its odds at plus 50%, probably not much higher than plus 50, but if I had to put odds on it, I'd put it just above 50, given a lot of the dynamics that are going on right now. But there's a whole lot that could change. There's a natural disaster that hasn't happened yet that could take up all the bandwidth in Congress, and they don't have time to get to this, and we just may fall victim to that. So any number of things could still happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, George Armstrong.
So yeah, I think to wrap, for our viewers, I think it's kind of hard to wrap everything that we've been talking tonight around, just passing the Safe Banking Act. So I think I kind of want to review what we have in front of us. The Safe Banking Act, as we talked about, would solve a lot of these problems. So as activists, we definitely want to see these problems solved. I would strongly encourage everybody to call their Congress people and their senators and make sure that there's full support of this act. Now, could that be fixed through prohibition, and should it be fixed through prohibition? I think that goes back to some work, that was done for the last couple of decades on the international side, and our federal government's failure to respond, right, to the basically the descheduling, the taking out of the treaty of cannabis and its medical use being finally realized in the treaty, in the international treaty. And our government hasn't responded to that. And part of that, I think, is the corner that they backed themselves into this whole time, because they, when states started to legalize it and the federal prohibition keeps going, they have to have, as was just mentioned, once that tax money starts rolling into the Treasury Department, they're going to find a way. That's never going to stop coming in. So they can't stop getting that, and that's a problem. So I think it's I would hope that federal prohibition would end because of that happening in December, and because of all of that. As a realist, like was just said, my expectations for this Congress are not huge on that, but I am always and ever the optimist, and we will keep fighting until that happens. But that's what actually that solves these problems if it's descheduled, which is actually what our government should do in response to what happened in December internationally. There should be some federal response, and it should be done by Congress to address this problem, because all of these problems, we will take 10 different fights to get to the end, but the fight of ending prohibition would solve the 9 fights that they've got us fighting on the side. I think that's the big picture for people watching. That's the way I gather onto it. And then just really quickly, if anybody else has anything to add to this, my question on reading the very short bill was the last paragraph speaks of the government will lower its cap and anything over that cap will go into the general fund. And I was wondering, the people that were close to the act, if they could explain that, and what type of money we're talking about in that, because it may play into what I was just speaking of. And I'll end there.
Mr. Green, did you want to respond?
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, this discussion is wide ranging, includes a multiplicity of factors. George just talked about several number of fights that you have to take. Prohibition, ending the prohibition seems to be the answer. Still in my mind, I'm pro descheduling as opposed to rescheduling. I was thinking about a comment you made, Tan, about the revenue to the government, the cost, and how the Treasury doesn't like to let go of money. It seems to me, I read an article a long time ago, like I'm thinking 2011, 2012, where it was, who was the economist? Jeffrey Micron, who determined with 100 economists that $7.7 billion was spent by the federal government just on the enforcement of marijuana issues. Forget the rest of the war on drugs. $7.7 billion. On top of that, the states are spending, now not being changed, obviously. States on top that spending, in 2019, $3.5 billion on enforcement. That's tax revenue going out. That's money that came in going out. And for what reason? So I say, Treasury will always take their share, whether it's fair or not. But what are the savings? Why is that not part of the major discussion every time? What the actual tax savings the American public could be, or what has been the actual cost to this insane war on drugs since 1970. 100 billion, 200 billion, a trillion? I don't know the answer to that. I haven't been able to get a good number from anybody. But the revenue is already out there. There's savings available to the government and therefore to the American public, each and every one of us. And yes, as activists, we have to continue this fight on all fronts at all times. Patients Out of Time has been dedicated for 25 years to cannabis. That's the reason for their existence. And the process has brought it's wonderful scientific and medical information to the population of the United States. But it seems to me, people tend to wake up when it comes to money. By the way, I liked Anthony Jones's thought about a community bank. I was sitting here thinking the same thing. What if you created a bunch of state institutions in state, chartered by the states to do this? And I understand the vulnerability that they have from your discussion, what you've lent to this, gentlemen. It seems to me, bottom line, in large measure, might be actual dollars. Everybody's struggling for bucks. What is it that we are spending? I don't have a good number. Maybe one of you gentlemen, one of our guests, Michael or David, have an answer to that. What is it we're spending every year? And what have we spent in the aggregate maybe since 1970 or 1971?
A little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure on what we.
It's like the love index a little bit.
Yeah,
Mike, you want to follow up there?
It's certainly my ways. And actually, the reason I jumped in was to answer George's question on the section 15 on the surplus funds. If I'll be honest, I hadn't paid too much attention to this section of the bill before. But just looking at it now, what I think this is, and it sort of speaks to the point, Michael, that you were bringing up, is I think this reducing the amount of monies that are appropriated to the Federal Reserve Act by $6 million. I think what this is basically saying is safe banking is going to reduce the need for federal enforcement. Therefore, you don't need as much money for federal enforcement. My hunch is this was probably at the behest of some of the Republican champions of the bill, that they're always really big on like, how are we going to pay for this? Or what's the offset? That's no longer a rule in Congress that they have to offset new spending with old spending. And I don't think SAFE would actually create any new spending. So not necessarily an issue. But Republicans are often trying to get things into bills that reduce the amount of appropriation. So I have a feeling that's around there. If they're reducing it by 6 million a year, they're spending at least 6 million a year just on this aspect, unfortunately. Again, some of that's intuitive, so I wouldn't take that as gospel, but that's section of the bill is speaking to. But that's when I read it more carefully, that's what I thought it was.
Thank you, Mike. That's a great follow-up to George, and hopefully, George, that gives you some understanding of where things stand at the moment. Do you have a question or follow-up there, George?
No, sir, that answered it just fine, and I'll keep following that part of the bill because I think following the money is always a fun and interesting thing to do in political situations.
No, it is key because the things that we want to watch out for is we want to watch out for cherry picking by the police departments again. They got addicted to all that prohibition money. Oh, they got swelled fat. They could actually just steal and take it. And that's what they're doing. As I was talking about those state where they're actually hitting up a legal cannabis money distribution chain and just outright stealing the money and saying, well, you know, and they're going to leave it for the courts to find out. But you know as well as I do, courts take 2 to 5 years to finally get a result. My case against the federal government took 5 years to resolve. And it was only resolved because, you know, inadvertently, I started Americans for Safe Access and they created the Rohrbacher Amendment. So again, I never expected to sit under the tree and feel the shade of that law, but it advertently saved me, you know, and my dispensary when they forcefully evicted us because they could no longer pay for the federal prosecutor to go in to spend the money to even talk to the judge. And so they had to settle. Otherwise, you know, so this is again where, you know, activism matters. And as the, you know, the Dalai Lama said, you know, live your life right early so that later you may enjoy it a second time. Well, you know, I never expected it, but I'm very blessed and humbled to have. But it also shows you why we've been doing this for decades and why we're trying anything and everything to help really just hit every rung as we climb this ladder, because I do feel that, you know, I still feel to a bit we're playing Sisyphus, you know, we're still rolling this rock uphill and it's coming down. However, some of that rock is broken off and gone over the hill, but it's still coming back on us. And until that federal prohibition, I think, is finally dismissed and we can start to whittle away at something as simple as banking, and as we have pointed out, how it affects you, the individual, all the way in, and how it affects us nationally, and well as it has an impact internationally, because you know, we're still the world's policemen going around throwing our weight behind, you know, drug laws. And thankfully to Michael Krawitz and others here on this council, what we're doing internationally is changing that so that, you know, other countries don't have to deal with the repercussions or executions for the simple use of cannabis, because it's unjust and an unreality that none of us can stomach. So we soldiers have been taught to fight. We've never been taught to rest, so we will carry the fight forward. And I want to
Amen.
I want to thank everybody tonight for this rather fascinating discussion. Does anybody have any other follow-up or any part of this discussion we haven't touched on that they want to touch on before we close out? All right. Well, Mike?
Yeah, I would just want to, I want to thank Michael for inviting me to this, and for everyone in the group for providing this forum. I think it's a great forum. It was, you know, very intelligent civil dialogue on one of the few areas of controversy where most of us who are working to end prohibition aren't completely on the same page. And I think this was a great conversation with a lot of good ideas. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being a solid contributor and helping people understand a greater depth, because you also helped educate me as well. And I appreciate your years of service and what you do. And it's an honor to have you. And David, it's constantly an honor to have you to share any time with you in any way, shape, or form. These discussions we are thankful for, and we'll continue these discussions. We come in every other Friday and have these roundtable discussions on topics that we feel are worthy of discussion. So if you feel there are any, feel free to write us on our Facebook or go to our Facebook page. You can also write Veterans Action Council at gmail.com and send us any follow-up questions. Mr. Green.
Yeah, ML Mathry just texted in. She's been part of the listening in for a while. She wondered if it was too late to offer one comment.
No, Mary Lynn, you're here. So please unmute yourself and add to the discussion. We consider it an honor to have you here as a sage.
Unmute.
Yeah, thanks. No, I've been quietly listening because this is not my area of expertise, but I thought in terms of closing, we are making strides, and you keep wondering where these legislators they keep chasing the money and not what's right. But Greta Thunberg, I'm such a little champion of her, and she's right. With climate change, it's like we've got to act like the world's on fire. Your house is on fire, and do something. We need to be pushing bills where they're actually doing incentives for growing, this social equity stuff, but it should be incentives. This planet needs this plant so badly, and we keep moving slowly. I think I'm just, ATN, it, Michael knows it, for being in this for so long, Michael Crowitz, it's just frustrating. But now we've got, every state has the majority of the people. Between voting rights, which we better keep fighting for, and this issue, this is an issue now that we have to really make people understand. We're not trying to just get rights. This is for the sake of the frickin' planet. And it's not that the plant's going to save the world, but fighting against it is certainly defeating any progress towards saving the world. It's just a bigger issue. But yeah, I really appreciated this talk, because clearly you need, the banking issue is such a basic issue that needs to happen. One sense they start claiming, they're just a place for robberies and that. And it's like, well, of course, when you've got cash like that, of course it is. But anyway, thanks for the discussion. I literally started out on Facebook. I was trying to figure this out because I was last minute to catch on, and I thought, oh, wait a minute, I got to join the group. So I've just been quietly listening and enjoying all the discussion. Thanks much, you guys.
Mary Lynn, it's always an honor, and we appreciate what you do, and to hear your advice is always helpful. Yes, it's very, I agree with you. It's very frustrating also to be here on a Friday night talking about banking. Nothing sexy about banking, nothing fun about banking. None of us are going to the beach thinking about, banking, none of that, you know what I'm saying? It's just not a reality, but that most average Americans wouldn't think about. But we hope that we gave you a better understanding about why it matters to you and why it matters to us and why it is important, so that we can get past this hoop. I agree with Mary Lynn. We're here for help the planet, but I'm here to save the humans from the jails. That's why I got involved. I got tired of my brothers and sisters languishing in jail. And unfortunately, as we're having this discussion, being free doing this, there are people behind bars, some doing life or doing exactly what we're talking about for very much less amounts than what I have dealt with. Needless to say, as somebody who has sold over hundreds of thousands of pounds over the decades, and I know people are in there for a quarter pound, people doing life for an ounce, so it ain't funny, it sucks. And so this is a part of that prohibition, and this has affected especially people of color. It has actually destroyed communities outright, and has taken literally adult males from an entire swaths of communities because of how we have taken this racism and applied it throughout the industrial prison complex, which still has industrialized slavery to this day, from you know, people who are in jail, talk to them. You know, I had a friend who was in the Colorado pen who was growing tilapia fish and selling it to in the prison, and then they were selling it to the local Whole Foods as naturally you know, grain-fed, you know, fish, until people wrote Whole Foods and said, you realize you're buying prison labor fish for pennies on the dollar, and, you know, basically condoning, you know, slavery. So this is what's happening right now in America. I mean, most people I know who have been in jail or to jail have been offered a job of an industry inside a prison. So maybe that's something we can talk about in the future, is the prison industrial complex. And if you start to look through and see that your Fruit of the Loom and all of your Victoria's Secret, as well as various other Old Navy, and you go look up exactly what people make in prisons, I think you'd be rather shocked. And it is slavery. It is modern day slavery. And it is, again, perpetuated by the racism of this drug war. And this is part of the chisels of the rocks that we have to hit so that we can arrive at a bleaching of sunlight on them, so that people are aware. So again, I want to thank David Borden, Mike Liszewski, our guests tonight, and of course our council members, Michael Green, Brian Buckley, Michael Crowitz, Anthony Jones, Marilyn Mathry, and of course the George Armstrong, ladies and gentlemen, and myself, Etienne Fontaine. This has been the Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 29. And we will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow night. It's of course here on our YouTube. It's been shared across our LinkedIn. So feel free to share this discussion with people in and out the industry so that they're educated. And you can go to our Veterans Action Council YouTube channel tomorrow night, and this will be available for you to cut and paste and put across your socials. So again, it's been a great discussion and a great group of people, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. We don't know what the discussion is yet. We'll find out in 2 weeks, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much. Y'all have a great rest of your weekend.